In the beginning there was only silence and survival. The sun rose, the rivers flowed, and men lived by the rhythm of hunger and rest. To eat was wealth, to live another day was luxury. Yet somewhere between the fields and the fires, the first question formed in the human heart: how much is enough? No one answered, because no one knew. But the moment the question was born, so was the chase. Men began to look at what others held. A hunter with 2 spears seemed stronger than one with none. A family with more grain seemed blessed, while another with less felt cursed. Envy became the seed of invention, and invention gave birth to possession. They started marking their caves, their tools, their territories. What was once shared by all became guarded by few. Out of fear of losing came the idea of owning. Out of owning came pride, and out of pride came the first boundary drawn in dirt. The first man who claimed a piece of earth for himself believed he had gained freedom. He had not. He had forged the first invisible chain, the belief that peace could be kept by holding on to something. The earth did not protest. It simply watched as its children divided it piece by piece. From these divisions came tribes, from tribes came trade, and from trade came the spark of value. At first it was simple: meat for grain, hide for firewood. But trust was fragile, and memory failed. The old and the greedy began to keep count, carving lines into bones and stones. Those lines were the first debts recorded by mankind, the first symbols of a promise not yet fulfilled. The promise became more powerful than the gift. A man's word turned into weight. A broken promise could destroy a life faster than a weapon. To prevent betrayal, people began using objects as proof: stones, shells, pieces of shining metal. These were not yet money, but they carried the seed of it. For the first time, value could be held, touched, and stored. Then came the metal that refused to die: gold. It gleamed in the sun and resisted decay. The tribes believed it to be a tear of the gods, fallen to earth. Whoever possessed it felt chosen. It did not feed or shelter them, yet they could not stop looking for it. They melted it, shaped it, wore it, and soon measured themselves by it. Gold was silent, but its silence shouted louder than any prayer. As centuries passed, man's world became a marketplace of shining illusions. The one who had gold commanded, and the one who had none obeyed. Villages turned into cities, cities into kingdoms, and gold became the invisible throne behind every visible crown. The priests said that gods favored the wealthy. The poor believed it because they had no choice. They were told that giving their small coins to the temple would buy them favor in the afterlife. The temples grew rich, the people stayed desperate. Then came kings to carve their faces into coins, ensuring that every transaction was also an act of worship. The people carried their rulers in their pockets without realizing it. They bowed to the currency, thinking they were bowing to prosperity. Empires rose on gold, and empires fell because of it. The lust that built the pyramids also buried civilizations beneath their own greed. When gold could no longer satisfy the hunger, men invented something new: credit. A piece of parchment, signed and sealed, could promise more than gold itself. It was lighter to carry and easier to multiply. Thus began the age of invisible wealth, wealth that existed not in hands but in belief. A farmer could borrow to plant, a merchant could borrow to sail, and a king could borrow to wage war. But debt is a slow disease. It feeds quietly, then devours loudly. Soon the lenders were richer than the kings. Their power was hidden behind ledgers, their armies made of ink. They ruled not by decree, but by due date. The world began to serve a God that had no face: interest. As generations passed, people forgot what money was meant to represent. It had started as a tool of trust, but had become the measure of worth itself. A man could lose everything except his humanity, yet the world would still call him poor. Gold once chained the hands of slaves. Now numbers chain the minds of free men. When machines arrived, they promised liberation. Iron horses pulled carts, engines powered factories. Time itself became currency. A man no longer sold his labor, he sold his hours. The clock replaced the whip, and yet the rhythm of servitude stayed the same. Factories turned cities into hives. Smoke filled the skies, coins filled the tills, and the old gods of nature were replaced by gods of profit. Men learned to measure progress by how much they could extract, consume, and discard. The soil was no longer sacred, it was resource. The body was no longer temple, it was labor. Families shrank, hearts hardened, and the language of affection was replaced by the arithmetic of survival. The rich began to dream of forever, the alchemy of turning time into eternity. They called it legacy, but it was only fear disguised as ambition. The poor began to dream of escape, of a day when they could finally rest, though rest never came. The world marched in perfect circles, driven by need and numbness. The marketplace had become the new universe, and its laws were absolute. Yet deep inside, something ancient still whispered. In the quiet between paydays, in the stillness before dawn, men felt it, the faint memory that life once had meaning beyond gain. But memory was not enough to break the spell. The next age arrived on wires and screens. The sound of coins was replaced by the hum of machines. Gold vanished from sight, yet its spirit lingered in every pixel, every transaction, every flicker of light. Men now measured worth in numbers they could not touch, in symbols they did not understand. They called it data, credit, cryptocurrency, new names for the same dream. They believed the old gods were gone, not realizing they had only changed form. Because money was never metal or paper or code. It was always belief. Belief made kings out of merchants and servants out of kings. It was belief that filled temples with treasure and belief that sent ships into the unknown. When men sailed beyond the horizon, they carried their gods and their greed in the same hold. Every new shore became a market, every new face a customer, every new resource a coin waiting to be claimed. The world grew smaller as the hunger grew larger. Land was carved, bodies were priced, and even faith became a business. Priests sold forgiveness, rulers sold protection, traders sold promises. The earth itself was mortgaged to ambition. Centuries blurred. Nations changed names, banners changed colors, but the story never paused. Every generation found a new justification for the same old desire. The explorers called it progress, the bankers called it growth, and the poets called it destiny. But all three meant the same thing: war. The oceans that once separated worlds became veins carrying gold and sorrow. For every empire that rose in light, another was buried in darkness. The mines swallowed thousands so that a few could glitter. The markets roared like storms, feeding on lives unseen. In palaces and counting houses, men drew maps that redrew the earth. They divided continents not by mountains or rivers, but by profit. A line of ink could turn villages into colonies and people into property, and the ink was always signed with gold. As the centuries turned, the hunger refined itself. The conqueror's sword was replaced by the merchant's contract, the soldier's march by the accountant's pen. Violence became polite. Exploitation became law. The empire no longer needed to invade. It only needed to lend. Paper replaced metal, credit replaced conquest, and invisible chains replaced iron ones. A farmer in debt was easier to rule than a prisoner in chains. The debtor policed himself, worked longer, slept less, and thanked the system for the privilege of owing. When the age of machines dawned, it promised a new era. Men believed the engine would free them from toil. Instead, it multiplied their masters. The machines did not care who owned them. They served whoever fed them fuel and flesh. Factories devoured daylight, and men traded hours for wages that vanished before nightfall. Cities rose like monuments to ambition. Towers of smoke reached heaven, but the prayers beneath them were silent. The clock replaced the sun, the whistle replaced the rooster. Time was no longer lived, it was spent. Children learned early that survival meant surrender. Schools became training grounds for obedience, teaching how to work, not how to wonder. The promise of prosperity dangled before every dreamer. Study, serve, save. Few ever reached the horizon. Most walked in circles, chasing the shadow of success. In the new faith of progress, failure was sin. Poverty was proof of laziness. Wealth was proof of virtue. The poor bowed not out of fear, but out of hope, believing that devotion to the system would grant salvation in another lifetime or another paycheck. The merchants became bankers, the bankers became governments, and the governments became caretakers of illusion. They printed belief faster than reality could contain it. Paper grew lighter, numbers grew heavier, and soon, money lost even the pretense of matter. The 20th century brought war not just for territory, but for control of value itself. Nations bled to defend pieces of paper backed by promises of gold that no longer existed. The blood was real, the gold was not. Out of the rubble, a new god was born, credit. It was omnipresent, invisible, and eternal. It required no altar, only consent. With a signature or a click, souls were bought and sold in silence. People began to believe that the future could be owned. They mortgaged decades ahead, sold hours not yet lived, and called it opportunity. Freedom became a loan. Life became an installment plan. And still, the world applauded. The numbers rose, so did the towers. The graphs pointed upward, and the hearts pointed nowhere. The more humanity advanced, the further it drifted from itself. The next revolution came quietly, glowing behind glass. The screen replaced the coin, the code replaced the signature. Money became a whisper of light, flowing through circuits faster than thought. The hand that once held gold now held nothing but air, yet it felt richer than ever. The digital age promised equality, transparency, connection. Instead, it perfected the art of control. Every transaction was a confession, every device a witness. Men became both the customer and the product. They called it convenience. They called it innovation. But the price was the last thing they owned, their attention. For whoever controls attention controls desire, and whoever controls desire controls the world. The new kings wore no crowns. They wore anonymity. Their palaces were data centers. Their armies were algorithms. They ruled from silence, unseen, unchallenged. The markets moved at their breath, and the governments followed. The average man, chained to his screen, believed himself free. He scrolled through dreams he would never live, comparing his hunger to curated perfection. His worth was measured by engagement, his voice by reach. He did not pray anymore, but he still worshipped, this time at the altar of visibility. Fame replaced faith. Influence replaced wisdom. The line between desire and identity disappeared. A man no longer wanted money to live. He lived to prove he was worthy of wanting. And through it all, the same ancient whisper persisted. More. It echoed through networks and nations, through churches and classrooms, through the quiet heart of every restless soul. More power, more followers, more possessions, more proof that existence mattered. But the whisper was not evil. It was misunderstood. It was not telling men to accumulate. It was begging them to awaken, to remember that the hunger they obeyed was never for gold or glory, but for wholeness. Wholeness cannot be bought, yet it is the only thing everyone tries to buy. It is the silence after applause, the peace after profit, the meaning after success. And it waits patiently for those who tire of chasing. The day comes for every man when the noise of the world no longer fills the space inside. The applause fades, the account empties, and the heart begins to ask what all of it meant. At first he blames circumstance, then others, then fate. But at last he sees the truth. The problem was never the amount, it was the direction. He had been running in circles around an emptiness that could not be filled because it was never meant to be. Ancient teachers called this moment awakening. It happens when the mind grows tired of the loop. Some find it through loss, others through stillness. The merchant who loses everything sometimes discovers peace for the first time. The king who abdicates his throne sometimes breathes freely at last. Freedom does not arrive when the chains break. It arrives when the desire to be chained disappears. Humanity stands now on that threshold. For all its progress, the race feels strangely heavy, as though dragging invisible weights made of numbers and expectations. Every invention that promised connection brought isolation. Every new market that promised fairness widened the distance between plenty and poverty. The world became efficient but not kind, intelligent but not wise, informed but not awake. The planet itself began to protest. Forests burned to print paper wealth, seas rose to wash away the debris of progress, skies dimmed under the breath of industry. The earth had given man everything: minerals, oil, metal, and memory. In return, it received waste, noise, and indifference. The soil that once birthed crops now grew plastic, and the water that once blessed villages now carried poisons. The price of greed was no longer spiritual, it was ecological. Yet even this, man tried to sell. The same corporations that drained the rivers branded themselves as saviors, promising sustainability at a premium. Every disaster became an opportunity. Every cure carried a price tag. The sickness had learned to market itself. Meanwhile, the few who still remembered the old wisdom began to gather in silence. They were not priests or politicians. They were ordinary souls who had simply had enough. They planted trees instead of flags, spoke truth instead of slogans, shared instead of sold. They were small in number, but vast in presence, for peace radiates further than power ever can. These people understood what civilizations forgot. Abundance is not measured by possession, but by participation. The sun does not own its light, yet it shines without loss. The river does not own its water, yet it never runs empty. To live like the sun and the river is to return to the original rhythm of life, the rhythm that predates money. In that rhythm, everything moves freely. The fruit falls, the bird eats, the seed grows, the tree rises. There is no debt, no interest, no shortage, only flow. Flow is nature's economy, and its only law is balance. Every time humanity breaks that law, imbalance answers in the form of crisis. Still, man clings to the illusion that he can own flow. He dams rivers, hoards grain, patents seeds, sells air. He measures the immeasurable and wonders why the numbers never end. He calls the endless counting progress and cannot hear the laughter of the wind. But something deep inside him remembers. Every time he stands at the edge of the sea, watching waves erase footprints, he remembers. Every time he holds a newborn child and feels that brief silence between breaths, he remembers. In those moments, he knows that life itself was the treasure and the rest was distraction. The oldest texts hinted at this truth. What does it profit a man to gain the whole world and lose his soul? The words were repeated for centuries, but rarely understood. To gain the world is to carry its weight. To lose the soul is to forget the lightness of being. The two losses are the same. When men finally grasp this, a new age will begin, not of machines or markets, but of meaning. Wealth will still exist, but it will serve, not rule. Money will still move, but like blood through a healthy body, circulating without greed or blockage. Trade will return to its sacred form. Exchange born from respect, not desperation. That transformation will not be forced. It will unfold naturally when enough hearts remember. Because nothing stronger than realization exists. Armies cannot fight it, and laws cannot forbid it. Once a mind awakens, the illusion loses power. Even now, small cracks appear in the walls of the great illusion. People begin to question growth that destroys, success that exhausts, prosperity that pollutes. They begin to sense that infinite consumption on a finite planet is not genius, but suicide. And from that awareness, change whispers. Change rarely shouts. It moves quietly through artists, through dreamers, through those who choose kindness when cruelty is cheaper. It starts as a conversation, then becomes a movement, then becomes a new way of being. The new world will not arrive with trumpets. It will arrive like dawn, softly, inevitably. A child is painting on a crumbling wall that once displayed bright advertisements of wealth and success. The paint is messy but full of life. A sunrise, a home, a tree. Each brushstroke spills beyond the lines, imperfect, yet full of hope. In this small act, there is more value than in all the coins the world has ever counted. Life begins in creation, not in accumulation. A marketplace built under trees. No brands, no plastic banners, only colors, textures, and laughter. People exchange goods, smiles, and small gestures of trust. Children chase one another around hand-painted stalls. Baskets overflow with fruits and grains. The air carries a sense of belonging. Here, value is measured not in coins but in care, in skill, in community. Trade is slow, deliberate, meaningful, a reflection of life itself. A man stands on a hill, watching the sunrise. His pockets are empty, but his eyes are wide with wonder. The city behind him is distant and silent, its lights slowly fading in the morning haze. He realizes that wealth is not something you chase outside. It is something you awaken within. The coins he counted yesterday cannot hold the sunrise he feels today. Every breath, every ray of light, every moment of stillness is a treasure beyond price. A library, walls stacked with books, old and new. A young woman opens a book. Dust motes float in the sunlight. She smiles as she reads a passage about the meaning of life beyond material gain. Knowledge becomes the currency that cannot be stolen. It multiplies when shared. It endures when all else fades. Each word she reads is a gift. Each story is seed planted in her mind. True wealth is found in understanding, imagination, and thought. Families planting trees in a barren land. The soil is tough, but hands are determined. Laughter and singing fill the air. Small sprouts begin to rise from the earth. Every seed holds a promise, every tree a legacy. Investment in life itself is the richest pursuit. The harvest is slow, but it feeds not only the body but the soul. Acts of care, patience, and love grow unseen until one day they bloom. A quiet evening by a river. People sit around a fire, telling stories. Children listen wide-eyed, passing a simple wooden ball among themselves. Stars reflect on the water, mirroring the stories above and below. The richest currency is connection. Moments shared, stories told, laughter given freely. These are the fortunes that compound in eternity. A smile, a kind word, a hand held in comfort, worth more than any sum of money. The city skyline from above, now peaceful. Streets still bustle, but the energy has changed. A calm, purposeful rhythm replaces frantic chasing. People walk together, share meals, exchange smiles. Light glows in homes rather than neon signs. Men have searched for money their entire lives, but the lesson is clear. The treasures they sought are not buried in banks or markets. They were in the moments they overlooked, in the dawn they failed to notice, in the hands they refused to hold. And now, finally, they begin to see. True wealth lies in presence, in care, in connection. A quiet hill at sunset. People sit together, looking at the horizon. The sky is painted in shades of orange and purple. Children play nearby, and a gentle breeze moves the trees. Life is not measured by the money we chase, but by the moments we share, by the kindness we give, the love we hold, and the memories we create. In the end, these are the treasures that endure forever.